Welcome to High School Bathrooms, everyone, the best place to have a conversation. I'm Simon.
And I'm Derek.
Today we're going to be talking about mottos, our life mottos, and basically the things that we live by, and how they've kind of progressed throughout the years, and how they shape us to be what we are today. Now, I'm going to let Derek start off with the mottos that he's had throughout his life, and kind of how they've shaped him. So let's start with what you had in your earlier life.
Earlier in lives, I wasn't really. I mean, I guess there's always sayings that you can go by when you're younger. Like, I mean, there's all those, I guess, maid's tales and stuff. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, and stuff. Oh yeah, wait, and stuff your parents told you, like, never talk to strangers, don't do drugs, all that stuff. I guess those would be my earlier years. But as I got older, I started really gravitating and towards quotes and mottos I see online, and I've also even made my own mottos and quotes. The biggest thing for me, I can't remember too much about elementary school, uh, but kind of ever since middle school, I've been getting into models and stuff that they kind of help me. I feel, in my opinion, models are kind of like mission statements for like businesses. They help keep you on track. They keep you like you know what you're trying to do. And one of the models I can remember, the earliest ones I've ever had, was to basically just try your best every day. And I still apply it even today because when I talk to my guidance counselor or anyone about college, for example, personally, I'm not a big person who stresses out about college. I know a lot of people do. They like worry about it. They're like, oh man, I need this for my resume. I need a good GPA. I need all this. I'm like, I'm really chill and relaxed about it. I'm like, as long as you try your best every day, everything falls in place. And that's what I've been doing for the past like literally like 6 years, just trying my best every day, and it works. But that's not one of the earliest ones. I've had other ones, but the other ones I have come out more recently, like more in my high school years. But Simon, do you have anything that you wanted to talk about in your earlier years?
Um, this is kind of I have a more of a progression as I went throughout. So, in my really younger years as a little kid, I always believed that I had to be either one of the most like knowledgeable kids and other things, and one of my mottos was, oh, learning is great, and keep learning everything over all else, which
Mm-hmm.
is not the worst thing, but there is flaws to that still that I've realized, and that's where I've come to a progression. But that was one of my earliest mottos. Learning is how you become successful solely, and that was one of the reasons why I learned a lot as a younger child, just because I loved to learn, and I still do love to learn, but I loved to gather information. And that was one of my younger mottos. And then my other one was that a very naive motto that
Mm-hmm.
money is how you become successful.
Mm-hmm.
And I solely focused on money as a younger child, and thought about ways that only to get money and not worry about a job. Um, but that was like one of the big things for me, learning all that I could and trying to figure out how to get money just as a younger child.
Now you talked about learning, and you made me realize. So back in elementary school, I know how I said this in a previous podcast, and I told you, but I said how I wasn't always the smartest kid like ever, right? I was
Mm-hmm.
actually really dumb. Like, we talked about this in the I think our first episode actually, but I didn't. I don't know if it was just a combination of me like not knowing like English, most likely that, but maybe just also me not trying or me not really like I guess maybe being kind of slow in general. But in around third grade, I told you I had that little like weird like mental puberty thing going on, and I got really smart, and I came from like in my math class, which was an enrichment math class. You had both people who needed more math because they were higher levels, or you needed people who were lower level and needed extra help. I was in that class because I was one of the people who needed extra help, and I jumped from being the slowest kid in there to being the fastest kid in there, like over the course of a year, like a few years. And so learning to me has also been a motto, and that whole concept has been reinforced throughout the years because I read books and stuff. And in order to become a better person, you have to be progressive. You have to change but change for the better, and that's also one of my big mottos I go by. I am not opposing change. I know a lot of people do oppose change sometimes just because it's foreign to them and they're uncomfortable with it. But I try to step out of my comfort zone and do a lot of stuff as long as I'm doing it for the betterment of myself and not the deterioration of my own like constitution and um, just trying to become a better person in general.
So so we've talked about elementary school. Now let's move on to kind of the meat of the whole thing where this starts to change. Where do you see your middle school and your in between years and your models during then and how they applied to your life?
Middle school, like we had, like I feel like for everyone has is one of those very conflict-ridden times where you're trying to find out who you are and what you want to do, and it's a it's like a self-identity crisis. You're hanging out with new people, you're meeting new friends, you have more people to talk to, you're doing all this stuff in school, doing all these clubs. You're older, you have more responsibility, you have more things and more opportunities because you're older. Um, so it's a very busy, kind of confusing time. And when I went through middle school, I mean, I still went through by my biggest motto, which was just try your best. Honestly, uh, what I get really mad sometimes when I see people not like trying their best or their hardest, um, just because I still follow that model today. But um, I always followed that in middle school. Um, but middle school is when, like I said earlier, where many more of my mottos started emerging, I guess you could say. And this actually started developing in eighth grade, um, because in I feel like in middle school some of the things you had were insignificant because you're still learning. Like I still really wanted to be like I guess like I don't know how to, like I guess no that doesn't work. I really wanted to. I wasn't caring about the things that were important. I was caring more about, I guess, like social life over school and everything like that. So some of the models that I had, if I can even remember them, like I said, I have a bad memory, are insignificant. But one that still stuck with me, and I still remember this very clearly, that started developing in eighth grade and has been slowly gaining strength over. It started when I was younger, and it was that I wanted to grow up, right? Like you're a kid, you're like, I really want to grow up. I want to be mature. I want to have more opportunities and responsibilities. But it, as I grew up, the opposite kind of started happening. I started wishing I was younger again. And I don't know if this is something that everybody goes through, or at least, or it's just something that I go through. But I started um, being going from I want to get older to I want to be younger, and then because of that, I wanted to kind of remember my inner childhood, my inner youth. I wanted to kind of hold on to that as long as I could. And I mean, yeah, by the time I hit middle school, I wasn't like an innocent kid anymore. I've been exposed to too many things. But I always wanted to have that that childhood wonder, like the little wonder. Like even if you saw a butterfly, you would be like, "That's so cool." And I feel like as you get older, you stop caring about stuff like that. You're like, oh, look, there's a tree. I mean, it's no biggie, but like when you're younger, it's like, whoa, look at the bark, like look at all these bugs crawling on it. You're just fascinated, interested with the world, and that's kind of what I'm trying to still be. I'm still trying to be amazed, even at the littlest things in the world, um, and that's actually one big reason why I play Magic. I don't know if I said this or not, but it reminds me of my childhood because I always used to run around and have like use my imagination and do all this like and play fight, and I had Legos to play with, and so just seeing like stuff like dragons and all that stuff just really makes me feel like a little kid again, which is one of my biggest things that I'm trying to hold on to. But Simon, what do you have for middle school that you wanted to talk about?
So middle school was not the greatest for me, and that's why my middle school stories are not fun because I just wasn't very active during middle school. I was kind of just on autopilot and
I get it.
things didn't happen for me. But what did happen was an influx in my brain, in my like whole mottos and mentalities. At least that's when it started to happen because one thing that I realized, if you notice in my earlier years, I had a lot of focus on being better than others,
Mhm.
and that's my biggest flaw that I have. I was super arrogant as a young child, and I'm still super arrogant, and I realize this now. So I try and fix that in every way that I can, and I try my best to not try and show off and things like that, because it's not cool. It's not awesome to be arrogant. You can still do great things and be humble about it, and that's what I'm trying my best to do, because I was super arrogant as a young child, and I'm just trying to fix that. And that's what I noticed in middle school, because as I went through middle school, I realized I was being unfair towards others and not giving them the respect that they deserve, because they're just as good as I am. I'm not
Mm.
better than any
You
of
were
them.
kind of looking down on them
And
because they weren't you.
that's where the influx of my mottos came in, because instead of thinking, oh, learning is everything and I have to learn and know everything, I started to realize that I can't learn and know everything. So I just kind of took that on still in my brain to learn, but instead of learning everything, I kind of switched it over to learning more about these people that I haven't been giving respect to. And that's where my love of people has started to grow ever since middle school, because I've had this fascination with others. That's why I love science and psychology as much as I do now, because that's one of the biggest things.
So it was a moment of
And
humility, and for you, you were more humble. You're saying you realized at an
yeah,
awakening.
and that's where my humility and things started to kick in, and I'm still arrogant, but I try and reverse that and stop that through thinking over what I'm doing.
Hmm.
And that's also where I started to lose the sight of money, because I realized that I don't need money to be successful in life. And though media may show you that, oh, people with money are successful, statistics will show you that people with money hate themselves. They want to, most of them don't like their lives. They don't have good family lives, because everyone wants that money, and money drives bad things. It's not the
Agreed.
root of all evil, but people are the root of all evil. And when they're given something it's like throwing gasoline in a fire.
Hmm.
It's burning down an entire building because you wanted something that you don't even need and don't even want, really. You just think you want it. And that's why I've kind of put that on the backside and kind of just want to have fun in life and learn about people, culture, things like that, instead of worrying about money or anything like that. As long as I can survive, I don't care. And that's when this really started happening for me.
Now, something you said earlier about how you really started getting in touch with people more. It reminded me of a quote I just remembered. It's a Bill Nye quote. I love Bill Nye. It's the quote: "Everyone you will ever meet knows something you don't." And I feel like I had that humbling moment that you're talking about in middle school too, because I had just moved from my elementary school, my middle school, in seventh grade to new middle school I go to now, the school system I've been in, and it was a humbling moment because as of the time I moved, I was probably, I mean, at least I consider myself the smartest kid in my grade. I was head honcho, you know, I was that one guy, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as I moved schools, I kind of came in expecting to be head honcho again, but that's not how it works. I moved and I knew so many more people who at my new school who were smarter than I am, and at first I was kind of shocked. I was, you know, it's like being a king, and then going over to like a new kingdom, and then all of a sudden you're like a prince. You know, it doesn't feel right. Like, so I had that whole like, moment, but I had to realize that I wasn't going to be the best at everything, like you talking about, but I could be pretty darn good at what I wanted to be, and that's transferred over
Mm-hmm.
today, where I'm content with myself, at least in comparison to others, where I don't I admit that I'm not as good as someone else in a certain category or specific area, but at the same time, I may be better than them at this, and that's okay to me. I don't have to be the best at everything. It's it's
Mm-hmm.
so I've made peace with myself over that. And something you said that you reminded me about is I had kind of a whole, I guess you could say, positivity phase. Um, I mean, not that it's a bad thing, but I'll explain it. It's I used to be have a very strong focus on positivity and happiness. Um, Maybe partially because I wasn't having the the best middle school years, at least early middle school when I was still over in New York. Things were kind of low key falling apart. Like I was doing fine, my grades were okay, like but it was my whole social life aspect that was falling apart. So I guess I really was pushing positivity, and I would be very happy. Like I would fake it till I made it, you know. And I mean, I guess I transferred over my whole middle school years, just my whole focus on positivity and happiness. Like everyone should be happy, and that's why actually, since I faked it so much, I kind of made it, and that's why I'm such a very cheerful person today. Because I always practiced being cheerful, even if I didn't want to be. I always forced it. So that was one very big theme of mine, just spreading good vibes. But something else I did in middle school maybe kind of ruined that. Um, I kind of went through my whole like SJW phase, like social justice warrior, where like you're very touchy on certain things. And I feel like as you grow older, that's what happens. At least that's what like you go from being more liberal, like in terms of like politics, you go from being more liberal to conservative the older you get. Most generally, that's what happens. Um, but I went through that little phase in middle school, and I would just be totally against stuff like racism and bullying and all that stuff. And don't get me wrong, I still am, but I took more of a like vigilante role in that, where I would just call people out on it, and I would attack people sometimes because of that. Just because uh, I had such a strong hatred, like literal hatred for that. And now, as I gotten older, I realize that's not right. I mean, what they're doing isn't right, but as long as they're not hurting anyone, like physically or anything, they're entitled to their thoughts and opinions, and you have to respect that right. So that's why today, I've kind of weaned off of that from taking a very activist, like vigilante role, and saying, "Hey, you're wrong. Stop." As long as they're not hurting anyone, I respect what people think, and I don't care as much. You can go ahead.
Yeah, so I also have opinions on the feminist movement, but we'll save that for another
Hmm.
episode because I have a very different
Yeah,
view.
I know that you don't agree with the traditional norms and everything, and I respect that. Like I know you're for women's rights, just not for the whole like some of the other things that go
Mhm.
along with it that are kind of negative.
Yeah, like I don't. It's not that I don't. It's not that I agree with racism or that I think any race should be oppressed. It's just I don't agree with the movement, and that's for another
Yeah.
discussion and another debate, and that's something that I love to do.
Now,
But
for high school, this is where
yeah,
most of my stuff comes in here. What do you have to talk about for high school, Simon?
okay. So as I've gone through before, a my eighth grade summer was a huge deconstruction of all previous beliefs that I had and all these misconceptions that I had about basically humanity in general,
Hmm.
um, because I was so fearful in my eighth grade summer, and it destroyed all of those preconceptions were destroyed when I came over to this new school, and that kind of rebuilt me as a human, and I think it helped me for the better because. As I said, my middle school years were the kind of the turning point, but my high school years were where I really started to develop strong beliefs about literally the exact opposite things of what I thought before. Because I still believe that you should learn about people, and I don't think that learning about other things is as important. And I still do learn about other things, just because I think keeping your brain knowledgeable is good. But I've tried to cut back on worrying about being always being the best, which was one of my early mottos. And like, if you combined all the things I thought as an early child, that would be one big thing that I thought. And as such, he's it would basically I've destroyed that, got rid of that, and I've tried my best to not think that way anymore and try and think in a way that is positive for my community, positive for those around me, and helps me learn about others without making them go away from me, or like not listen to what I'm saying because I seem like I'm a show off or arrogant. And this has kind of culminated to make my current mottos, which would be such as um, learning is important in life as long as it takes a back seat to learning about society. And that's kind of it's kind of long-winded, and in a long-winded explanation of learning about others is important. And that's kind of where I want to take my life. Not worry as much about the business aspect, but what I can do to find out about culture, find out about society, what's wrong in it, and do my best to help people and learn about their struggles, their lives, and not keep myself inside this box that I have been for such a long time.
So basically, as you've grown older and progressed, you're basically moving inwards to outwards.
Yeah, so it kind of moves from introverted uh basically illusions of grandeur to extroverted delusions of just breaking of delusions in general. And that kind of helps me progress in life and move towards a place that I really want to be, which is also another one of my current mottos, which is I always have flaws, but flaws aren't the problem. The problem is not trying to fix those
Mm-hmm.
flaws.
That's something I agree with
And
100%.
that's kind of what I try and do consistently across the board now. I try and fix my life in all the ways that I deem important, and even ways that I don't necessarily deem important, but could be impactful to others. Now, this isn't going to necessarily change my personality, and there will always be problems with myself because there's no way to have no
Mm-hmm.
flaws, but it won't stop me from having a semi direct personality, which is kind of what I have now. I used to be a little bit more introverted, but now I'm pretty direct with people and I won't hold myself back on that. So that could come off as rude or brash, but I still think that I'm going to keep it that way, and even if it's taken as a flaw, I'm still going to have flaws, but I'm going to try my best to fix them.
I feel like that's actually one part of growing up, and maturity, where and I go through the same thing too, where you make peace with yourself, but like we said, we kind of touched on it earlier, just self improvement, progression, like change for the better. As long as you accept and point out your flaws, which is the mature thing to do, instead of saying, oh, like I honestly can't stand people, like even people, I can't stand people who say that I'm perfect just the way I am, because in my opinion that's not true. There's always something you can touch on. There's always something you can improve. You can never be perfect, but you can try your best to, as hard as you can, to change yourself and improve yourself for the better in order to try to be. So, I mean, people sometimes use it as an excuse to not change for the better. They just want to stay themselves, and who they are could always use improvement. But I mean, personally, it's not my life, so I shouldn't be cared too much about it. But sometimes I get kind of mad about it. But I get where you're coming from. Just you have to, you have to work on it. You can't be
Mm-hmm.
lazy. And you like oh yeah, the quote you just reminded me of, that in 8th grade. So I don't know if the people listening here familiar, or even you are familiar with Randy Pausch. You know Randy Pausch.
No.
He he was an American professor at Carnegie Mellon University who ended up um, getting cancer. I think was it pancreatic cancer, I believe. And he was a teacher, he was a professor there, and he lectured there at Carnegie Mellon. And while he was dying from his cancer, and that is what took his life away, I believe. He gave one last final lecture to like a hall packed with people, and he talked about his life in there basically. And I watched the video. I don't remember everything in it, because it was kind of a while ago, but it really touched me. And one of the quotes that really stood out to me that I still use today is, "We cannot change the cards we are dealt, just how we play the hands." And I agree 100% with that. It appeals to me because, I mean, I play Magic, so that's one way it appeals to me. But it's just a really powerful quote because when you think about it, everyone's born in different situations, different skills, different abilities, different looks, everything with that. But your success is dependent on what and how you use it. And um, success, as I've been getting older, my ambition has been growing, and I mean, I guess that could be both a benefit and a flaw, just because I'm so overly ambitious. But I try to keep virtue when I'm being ambitious, so I'm not doing anything too unscrupulous. But ambition has been a very large thing that's been growing ever since middle school. I've always wanted to try to be the best. I always work hard, and even today, that's one of the things that keeps me in high school. I say this all the time. I say the grind never stops because you always have to be working. You always gotta improve. You always gotta do better. Self improvement, ambition. But that quote really stood out to me, and I wanted to bring that up because you reminded me of it. But one other really big thing recently that's been kind of getting to me is the whole issue about religion. Um, I when I was younger, I didn't have the best view of religion. I I would say I was accepting, and I don't think I can say that I was accepting back then. I was more tolerant of it than accepting. I sometimes loathed religion because I was never very religious, and I would see people causing all these bad vibes. This is when I was still going through my whole positivity SJW phase, where people would just make bad vibes and use religion to justify it, and that wasn't okay with me. So I kind of had that whole thing where like I was kind of against religion because I saw more negatives than benefits. But recently, I've been becoming more open-minded and tolerant and accepting about religion. And and instead of seeing all the negatives over the positives, I see all the positives over the negatives now. And that's something that's been getting to me. But I didn't tell you this. I don't think I did. But one of the biggest things, at least recently for me, biggest things that I go through high school, I have cycles of growth that I consider having. And what I mean by that is every year I have a theme, um, and a quote sometimes to help me out with my theme of the year. And the cycle that I went through last year, well, ninth grade year, was kind of a maturity, intellectual cycle where I just became smarter and more wise, and I had to grow up a little more because once you make that whole transition in middle school to high school, it's hard. The one for last year was a more of a social type of growth where I got more out of my comfort zone and I was more courageous. I did more things, and one of the mottos that really the actual motto that helped me last year that I ran by was, "What's there to lose?" And what I mean by that is, when I'm ever in a social situation, you can always think of what's there to lose, and if you really think about it, it's things are insignificant. You're in middle school and you do something, no one's gonna remember it, and yet you're making a big deal of it in your mind. It's the whole fear factor, you know, like that quote. Who was it by? What was it? Uh, the only thing that fear is fear itself. And I feel kind of bad because I forgot who said it. But it's true because your mind makes you make a big deal out of things, and then so you don't decide not to do things. Like even I kind of had social anxiety a little bit. I don't know. I still do. I guess I don't know. It's not really that bad. But me being scared would stop me from my full potential, from getting out of my comfort zone. So that quote really, every time something like that happened, I would just talk to myself like, Derek, what's there to lose? Nothing. There's nothing to lose. It's all the gain. And my one for this year,
Yeah.
um, I'm hoping it's more of a physical growth, for me. So I'm trying to get more in shape. I'm trying to be more comfortable in my body. And kind of the thing I'm going by right now would be, the quote I'm going by would kind of be no regrets. Because something I've been realizing, because of my ambition, I've been kind of, and people pointing it out, I've been kind of missing out on life. I'm missing out on a lot of experiences just because I'm always busy working. And I'm trying to go through the rest of my high school career, um, and really the rest of my childhood, because once, I'm 18, I graduate high school, I mean, I feel like you lose all that sometimes. And I'm trying to go through it without regretting anything. And um, so something recently made me realize that really hard. So I've been going with that. So if that's my motto for this year, because sometimes I don't actually decide on a motto for the year until the actual end of the year when I look back on it. But that's just kind of what's been going on up to this point.
So, we've been talking a whole lot about how our mottos have changed throughout the years and how they've kind of fluctuated in other things. But if you had to decide on one quote that you can make yourself or that someone else has said, what would that quote be for your whole mindset that hasn't, the part of your mindset that hasn't changed throughout the years?
Well,
Something that you've
how
always
about
stuck
how
to.
about you go first? Because I'm trying to think about it. But what I think you have, do you have an idea of what it would be?
Um, yeah, I kind of do, and this is a little different for me just because it's not about all the things that I've talked about, but it's kind of well, I mean, it kind of incorporates all of that, and it's kind of like just different, or I mean, it includes everything, but it kind of summarizes it all. And that is always learn what there is to learn and never learn something that you shouldn't do. Like, I guess that's how I could put it. Because I always have wanted to learn more and more and more, but I've always known that there's things that I shouldn't learn, like
Mm-hmm.
bad habits and things like that. And I've always realized that there's been bad habits and drugs and sex and other things that I
Mm-hmm.
probably shouldn't get into. And that's not, and not to say that those things are the worst possible things you could do, but I just know that I did not want to get into those things, and I've always wanted to learn as much as possible. So, do you have a
Mm-hmm.
quote that you could use for your
Well,
life?
if you for the listeners hearing and you, I mean, one of the biggest themes on high school bathrooms would for me would be, like you said, self improvement. We're always trying to become better people, and if I had to come, and that's been a constant theme in my life. I've always wanted to be better, although my definition of better has fluctuated over the years. Like, what's good. Um, like physical, like becoming more active, or like spiritual, softening my heart, becoming at peace with myself, or like mentally, like becoming more intelligent and knowing more. But the biggest continuity, and my quote, um, it's not by a specific person. It's just, I guess, my saying now that I would have to stick with. It just change for the better. That's really all it is. Change for the better. Three simple words that
Hmm.
I apply to my daily life every day, and that I go by.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid quote, and I've changed to that now, and I apply to that now. But as a younger child, I wasn't as keen
Hmm.
on changing myself for the better, just because I didn't
Yeah.
realize how many flaws I had.
But all right, everyone. Thank you for tuning into High School Bathrooms. If this is your first time listening, we hope you enjoyed. We try to make new content every weekend, so tune in next week for more. Also, check out our Instagram at HSB Podcast, all one word.
Make sure to smash that like button and comment down below what you thought about this episode and what you think we should do for future episodes. As always, thank you for listening. Share us with your friends, wash your hands with soap and water, and have a great day.